G'day everyone, welcome to the first episode of Timepiece Mechanics. My name is Jacob, and thank you for joining me. Today on the bench we have my Seiko SKX007. This was my work watch for many years in the mining industry, so it's seen a lot of abuse. Now I haven't worn this watch in quite a while, but the last time I wore it, it was gaining a ridiculous amount of time. My time grapher app on my phone here is saying something like 240 seconds a day, but I can guarantee you it's a lot worse than that. It's more like 240 seconds every hour. So I think it's about time I got this watch out of the drawer and fixed it up so I can get it back on my wrist. Alright, so let's get the back off this thing. I'm just going to use my trusty case opening ball. Seems to do the trick the majority of the time. And let's have a look inside. Huh, that doesn't even look too bad. I was expecting to see some dirt or something has made its way in. So this is the rotor for the automatic winding. So you can see it rotates both ways, and this happens when you move your wrist, and it actually winds up the mainspring, so that your watch is fully charged just from the movement of your day-to-day activities. So just pulling the crown and stem out. That's all that holds the movement in, is basically just pulling that stem out and the movement's free to come out. I'll just put that back in so I can adjust the hands. So now that I've set those hands in a good spot, I'll use my hand levers. So the plastic's there just so I don't scratch the dial. Trying to be very gentle with these hands. Now these dials are just friction fit, so they've got little dial feet and they just pop straight out. And we'll put that away to keep it safe. Now this little circlip here can be a bit of a pain sometimes, but I was lucky and it just popped straight off. The last thing you want to do here is slip and scratch one of those wheels there. Using a bit of Rodico to take that day wheel off. Now I'm relatively new to the watchmaking world. I've been interested in watches for quite a long time, and it all stemmed from watches just like this, dive watches. It's always a little daunting diving into something like this. You're worried about damaging things, losing things. But luckily with this movement, the 7S26, I think Seiko literally made tens of millions of these. They were in production for a long time. I think in the mid-90s up until 2019, something like that. So if I do lose anything, there's an abundance of parts that I could get on eBay or other sources online. It slows down the process a little bit, obviously, but it's always nice to know that if something pings across the room and I can't manage to find it, that it's not the end of the world. We're pretty close to having everything off this side of the watch now. There's not really that much, and it's not really that involved on this date side. Nothing's looking very bad, as to be expected. I'm just pulling out some wheels here that are white. They're actually a form of plastic, and Seiko seems to use these in their movements quite a lot. Probably because they're cheaper to manufacture, but they're also self-lubricating, which means no adding oil when the movement goes back together, which is pretty nice. Just taking off the hour wheel, which sits on top of the cannon pinion. And now the minute wheel. Oh, can't seem to grab this. There we go. Still, everything looks really nice under here. I thought I'd put the stem back in here. The thought process being that I would use it to let down the mainspring. But as I found out later on that doesn't really work. You have to use a piece of pegwood or something similar just to hold it, rather than using the crown and stem. That little wheel there is the date driving wheel, and that's also plastic. I'll just move these out of the way before I end up damaging them. Alright, now onto the other side of the movement. First things first, let's get this rotor off. So this is just held on with one big screw at the top. There's ball bearings in the center of this. It's quite sturdy. And again, there's no wear indicating that bearing has collapsed or has any sort of damage, which is a good thing. Now I'm going to take off the second reduction wheel screw, and as you can see, I'm actually turning this clockwise to undo it. So this is a left-hand thread, and it's a dead giveaway when you see a screw that has 3 slots on the top, that it's going to be left-handed thread. And you definitely don't want to take it off like a normal screw, a right-hand thread, because you'll break that off, and that will be a pain. Now the second reduction wheel can come off, and this actually looks quite dirty. You'll see it later on when I get it under the microscope to give it a good clean. Now's probably a good time to let the power out of the watch. So what I'm doing here is I'm using my tweezers to hold the click away from the ratchet wheel, and then allowing the screwdriver to slip through my fingers to release the power from the mainspring. This is just so that when I undo something, all the power isn't released at once and damage components of the watch. Now that the power has been released, I can take the ratchet wheel screw off and the ratchet wheel itself. You can see there's a bit of rust or dirt or something on this, and it's a bit tricky to take off. Oh, there it goes. Now just taking the screw off for the balance cock. And carefully lever the balance cock up, and being careful not to damage the balance spring. There we go, a bit of twisting, and then we have to store that safely over here. Now I'm just being very cautious with this because it's extremely easy to damage that spring. It's absolutely tiny. Now we can start taking out the screws for the train wheel bridge. The pole lever and its reduction wheel will stay on the bridge until we've removed it, and we'll take that off later. Now that the screws are out, you can just carefully lift up the bridge. Still looking pretty good under there. And now you can see the trainer wheels and the barrel. So we just removed that fourth wheel and the third wheel. Next is the click. So this just stops the mainspring from winding backwards and releasing all of its energy. Pull out the barrel itself. That's what contains the mainspring. And now another bridge. This bridge is called the center wheel bridge. Underneath it is the escape wheel and the center wheel. Oh, just a little bit stuck on there. Oh, come on. We'll get this eventually. And there we go. Now that's the escape wheel. And silly me tried to remove the center wheel there, but it's not able to be removed until we pull the cannon pinion off the other side. Here I'm just taking off a couple of tiny screws that hold down the pallet cock. And there's the pallet cock, which reveals the pallet underneath. You have to be really careful with pieces like this. The pallet fork posts that sit inside the jewels can break very easily. Now, with all that taken off, we can move on to the keyless works. So this is the yoke spring, just one of the few springs that are a part of the keyless works. So basically, all of this section here is to do with any of the inputs you have to do with the watch. So if you want to change the day or the date or set the time, this is all done through the keyless works. And there goes that yoke spring there. So now I'm just removing the yoke. You can see on the left side there, it's got a spring that keeps it under tension. And you just release that tension there. So that right hand piece moves back and forth when you pull the stem out and push the stem in. And this little piece here, that's called the setting lever. And to remove the stem, you push one side of the setting lever down, which releases the stem so you can pull it out. But with that gone, that will just slide out like that also. And the clutch wheel should just fall out. Yep, there it goes. Careful not to lose those. And that's about everything on this side of the movement. So we'll flip that over. So remember I said to get the center wheel out, you have to remove the cannon pinion. Now I don't have a cannon pinion removal tool, but you can just get it with tweezers like that. It just pops up and then the center wheel drops out. There you have it. Again, so far everything's looking really good. No smoking gun per se as to why it's running so poorly. I'm assuming it's possibly magnetized, or there could have been a bit of dried up oil somewhere. But once we clean it, we'll be able to have a better look. Now pulling this barrel apart to expose the mainspring was actually a lot harder than it looked there. It took me a little bit to try and separate it, but eventually I got it. Most people say to just replace the whole barrel complete, mainspring and all. Now I most likely will do this. I don't have a mainspring winding tool, so chances of damaging the spring are quite high. I figured I'd pull it apart anyway and see how I go and try and get it back in. Now I wasn't very successful with this. I got it out okay, but getting it back in is it's quite difficult. So I will most likely replace this unit. So once you pop the center out, you kind of just have to hold both sides of the spring down and let one half of a coil out at a time. If you just let go from where I am right now, it would just shoot out and you'd get grease everywhere. You might break the spring. So you've got to be pretty careful. I should have really removed everything from around this just in case it did that and flicked everything away. Okay, so on to one of the more tedious parts. So I've got everything under the microscope here. A lot of this is staining. I'm just going to give it a good scrub down and check all the teeth on all the wheels. Get a bit of pegwood into there. So you can see there's a lot of rust. So you want to get as much of that off as possible before running it through any sort of cleaning cycle. Now a bit of pegwood is fine, a bit of Rodico. Sometimes I dip the pegwood into a cleaning solution first and then give it a good rub. but it comes up pretty good. And I'll just show you a few of the things that had anything sort of substantial on them that's worth looking at. So you can see there's old grease on that. There's some rust on the rotor. Just giving it a bit of a freshen up before it goes through the proper cleaning. Same thing here. We're going to peg all the jewel holes. And again, just looking for anywhere where we've rubbed through the plating that would indicate something is damaged. And here's the pallet fork. So those jewels are held in place with a bit of lacquer. So you need to be careful how you clean those because you don't want to dissolve the lacquer and have the jewels move or fall out. Now everything's been through the cleaning machine. Well, not really a cleaning machine. I just use some jars with cleaning solution inside of an ultrasonic cleaner. But now that everything's clean and I've gone over everything, you can put that center wheel back in. And its bridge. I'm just holding it down with some pegwood there so it doesn't move while I put the screws in. Just making sure it's spinning freely. Now put in the escape wheel and its lower pivot hole. A little bit of oil to the staff of this wheel. So that was the fourth wheel that just went in through the center wheel. That drives the seconds hand. So when you press the seconds hand on, it goes onto that extended shaft, and that's what moves the second hand. Now the third wheel can go in. Now I'm just trying to line these all up perfectly so that when we put the train bridge on, all of the jewels line up with their relative wheels. And here I am putting the fourth wheel back on because I forgot to put the third wheel on first. We'll just move that to the side for now, and here we have the train wheel bridge. And these are the two small shock protecting systems that I was talking about. So these feel like they're about half the size of the balance ones. And this took me so much longer than I'd like to admit. I think I spread it over maybe 2 nights with quite a few hours of messing around. This was the first one that I cleaned and put back in, and it didn't take me that long, really, but it is very frustrating. Every time I felt like I had it, the jewel would feel like it was slipping out, and then I'd try and move the jewel and the spring would pop out. Now I'd never done one of these prior, so I was kind of just trying to do it the same way as I would do the balance shock protection system. And well, I managed to get it here after a lot of trying and failing. I did do it a different way for the second one. So there's a few times where myself and my partner would be on hands and knees looking for a jewel or a spring and it was very tricky. And there we go. There's one down, one to go. So here, after scouring the internet and YouTube, I found another way of doing it that someone recommended. So put the jewel in like normal. Again, these are tiny. It's really hard to explain how small these are. This is through a microscope, and it still looks small. So once we get that cap jewel in, place the spring down on top, just so the tabs are in the openings either side, lined up with the openings, which in itself isn't the easiest thing if you don't have the steadiest hand. So, now that that's lined up, you take your bit of pegwood that's shaped that will just push down either side and not the center, and you shave it down so it's the same width. I'm sorry, I'm a little in the way here. It's hard to do this under the microscope without getting in the way. And basically all I did was push down so that the tabs either side were compressed, and then twisted the pegwood, and it was just enough to get it started on both sides that I could go in with my tweezers and just finish turning it the remainder of that 90 degrees. And I tell you what, this was a sigh of relief when this went in. This was hours in the making. I was very relieved to have that in and done. So I failed at getting the mainspring back in, so I decided just to buy a whole new barrel, complete. Now a little bit of oil on the stem there. So you've just got to put a little bit on each of those flats, and then in a couple of spots along the shaft itself. And a little bit of lubrication on this is the intermediate wheel for the calendar corrector. And get that started. And then once that's on, you can put the clutch wheel on. That slides up and down that stem nicely. Now back on with the yoke. So that yoke sits in a little shoulder on the clutch wheel and is preloaded with that spring on the back side there that I'm just about to set. There we go. And just a little bit more lubrication on the post. And a little bit on the yoke where it contacts the setting lever. Oh. And again, you see how the setting lever sits over the stem on the left hand side there. And when you push the right hand side, it lifts that left side up, allowing you to slide out the stem. So usually there's a little button you push, but this one you actually push the side of the lever. And on with the yoke spring. Oh, this screw is going to give me a bit of grief. Now the yoke spring, when it's not pressed down, sits on a bit of an angle, so that's why I'm struggling a little bit here to get this screw started. But I will get it. Eventually. Maybe I'll try holding the head with a screwdriver while I do it. See how that goes. Oh, have I got it? Well, I was a little clumsy, but yep. And tighten the other one down. Now just push that yoke spring into place on the setting lever. Finish tightening down this one. And that's the keyless works done. Okay, now this is the pull lever that goes through the train bridge. So this lever only goes on one way. But these pulls here, this is what allows the rotor to wind both ways and still wind up the mainspring in the correct way. So I'll show you in a minute how this works. But here I'm just using a little bit of Rodico just to hold the pull lever in the right position so that I can get the circlip on underneath. And then once the circlip's on, it just holds that reduction wheel, the pull lever, and the train bridge all together. Alright, back under the microscope. So now we're putting the train bridge back on. So all the wheels have to be lined up pretty perfectly for it to sit down. And you never want to just start the screws here and just tighten them down, because you will 99 out of 100 times break one of the wheel staffs or posts. Now here I was scratching my head for a little bit. I pulled this off and on a few times, checked that the wheels were moving and they seemed like they wanted to go on, but it wouldn't go on. And can you notice anything here? Can you see why it's not going down? Well, I couldn't. I didn't notice that the click was sitting under the bridge on the right hand side on top of the barrel. So it was stopping the bridge from going all the way down. So silly me thought I just didn't have the wheels lined up, but it was because the click was pushed too far under the train bridge there. So here I am testing, why aren't these wheels lining up? But little did I know, the click was the culprit all along. Doesn't matter how hard I try here, it's not going to line up. I'm actually surprised it took me so long to notice this. I was focusing so hard on where the wheels were that I didn't notice the most blaringly obvious thing. Still haven't noticed. Being gentle, but getting flustered. There we go. I took it off and realized that's what the problem was. But we got there in the end, that's all that matters. Now just a bit of oil for the barrel pivot there. Ratchet wheel back on. Just get that click into the right spot. That wheel just sits down like that. So when you tighten this down, it wants to just wind the mainspring. So you have to hold the ratchet wheel while you're tightening this down. Which you can see me doing with a little piece of pegwood here. Now just lubricating where the pawl ratchet wheel or the second reduction wheel goes. And also where the pawl lever rests on that staff there. So just carefully move that over, ready for the wheel to go in. So you can see there's little hooks on the side of those pawls, and that's what engages with the teeth that I'm lubricating now on this wheel. I just put a few small dots around the wheel. Oh. Now we carefully put that down, and before you can get it fully down, you have to kind of line up those pawls so you don't bend them. You can see there's a little bit of staining of the rust left still. Now I did scrub and scrub and scrub, and it's extremely smooth. You can't feel it at all, but the staining just wouldn't come off. And here I'm just trying to line it up. There we go. So that was underneath the wheel. Perfect. Now remember the screw with the 3 lines on top? That's right, left-hand thread. So to do this one up, to tighten, is lefty-tighty. A lot easier to get right when you're doing it up. But when you're undoing it, you have to be really careful you go the right way or you'll break it off. So this wheel here attaches to the underside of the rotor. So as you turn that rotor in either direction, like what I'm simulating here, you can see how the pawls are only allowing that wheel to rotate one way. Now this is a Seiko thing. Pretty clever if you ask me. It's definitely a lot easier solution to what some other watch manufacturers have come up with. And now in with the pallet fork. Just trying to get that lower post into its jewel hole. Being super careful because I know how fragile these posts are to break off. Doesn't seem to want to line up. There we go. Beautiful. And now the pallet cock on. Same thing here, being super careful about that pallet fork. Now this pallet cock has 2 mounting points. In the Seiko manual it calls it a pallet cock. My impression was that if it had more than 1 mounting point it was a bridge. So is this a pallet bridge? Maybe. Again, sorry for blocking your view under the microscope here. Now I'm just checking to make sure that that's moving freely, which it is. Alright, now we have to lubricate the ends of the pallet fork jewels. This is very, very hard to gain access to, and you need a very steady hand. So you just want the tiniest drop on the end of the jewel here, and then we're going to put a bit of wind into the watch and have that escape wheel do a few rotations just to spread the lubrication over all the teeth. So you can see the heel, I guess, of the escape wheel dragging that oil away. I think I spun the escape wheel around maybe 7 revolutions or so, and then had a quick look to see if the lubrication was adequate, which it was. Now the balance can go on. So there's a little technique to get these on. You kind of hold the balance relatively steadily and then rotate the movement to have it fall into place. And away she goes. Now there's only a tiny bit of wind in this, so it's not moving too fast, and it still needs to have the top jewel lubricated. But we'll just get this balance cock tightened down. But it's alive. It's a good sign. Just put a little bit more wind in the watch here. Again, it's running slower than I would have liked. It was around about here that I realised what was wrong with the watch. If you look at the bottom of the balance spring there, it's all bunched up. Now this watch has been magnetised. Later on, I put it on the demagnetizer and it came good. That seemed to have sorted it. And then same procedure as before, we're just twisting that spring 90 degrees, a bit of Rodico to pull it out, and then Rodico again to pull the cap jewel and the setting out. So I just use naphtha, or lighter fluid to clean these. You kind of just dip them in, give them a little wipe down, and then put them on some paper to absorb the fluid. You can use a product called One Dip, but it's quite hard to get where I'm located, and it's also quite bad for you to breathe in. So for the sake of price and ease, I've gone down the route of using lighter fluid. It seems to do the trick, and a lot of other people use it, so it's good enough for me. So I've just separated these here. So I'm just putting these in the jar of lighter fluid now. Give them a swirl around. So I'll just put these down on the paper and let all that lighter fluid evaporate. And here they are, nice and clean. Now, same thing again, just trying to put a tiny dab of oil in the middle of this jewel. Perfect. Oh wow, look at that. Good trick that was. Well, didn't drop it perfectly, but we'll flick that over. Get that lined up before we put the spring on. And there we go. So again, these shock springs are still tricky to put on sometimes, but a lot easier than the two on the train bridge. They really tested me, those two did. Being super careful here. Last thing I want to do is slip and put my tweezers into the balance spring or something silly like that. And just like that. Just finish twisting that around. Done. Still running a little slow from what I can see. Now the same for the underside. Just putting that tiny bit of oil on. Again, you want it to be about 1/3 of the size of the jewel itself. Now these shock protecting jewels here, if you ever drop your watch or give it a hard hit of some sort, that's where these come into play. These are meant to allow the balance to move a little bit without breaking its pivots. Doesn't always work, but it's just a shock absorber. So it just helps in the longevity of the watch. A lot of older watches, vintage watches, you'll find that they'll be broken. If someone's dropped them or something like that, you'll find pieces to be broken. Whereas when you have a shock protection system, there's less chance that it will break. Now, I do always find it easier just to get one side started a little bit and then you can push down the other side and twist it in. Now it's stopped the movement, but just give it a little bit of a nudge and away it goes. Now I'm just oiling all of the jewels. So just a tiny amount of oil. And then by touching the oiler in between the staff of the wheel and the jewel, capillary action will draw in the oil around that pivot. So you really don't need a lot, and you definitely don't want to fill up the top section of that jewel there with oil. If you do things like that, then the oil can run down into the movement and it'll just gum everything up, and then your watch will work worse than before. So see, it's a tiny amount of oil. Just touch the gap there, a little bit messy there. But a little bit of Rodico helps it out. Let's have a tiny bit more there. So we just greased up that center wheel staff so that we can get the cannon pinion clicked back on. Now these posts that some of the wheels sit on need a little bit of oil as well. So this is the minute wheel going on. On with the date driving wheel. Again, they don't need oiling, being plastic. Now the hour wheel goes onto the cannon pinion. And that's the intermediate date driving wheel. Same thing, no oil used here. And that's the day date corrector wheel. And that slides up and down there in that little groove. And that's the date dial going on. And this is the date jumper, so that engages with the date dial. The date jumper has this little spring I'm setting here, which lines up with the teeth on the date dial. And that's so it indexes the numbers properly with the dial, so they sit in the right position on the face. Just making sure it's down properly here. So the date dial guard's about to go back on. When putting this on, it has a tendency for everything to sort of pop out of place. At least for me it does. So we'll see how that goes. The culprit is usually that black date driving wheel. Just a few little screws to hold this guard down. Once they're in, we're on the home stretch. Okay, all those screws are in. Now just a quick test. And working perfectly. So far so good. Now I did put that dial holding space, so the black ring around the movement back on. And this here is another plastic wheel, the intermediate wheel. Now one of the last things to go on here. So the day disc. So to get this on, you just have to move a little spring out of the way through the gaps in the dial. Because there's a little star on the back side of this. So there's a spring there, you just push that back and you can see it just drops down. When it's sitting flush, you know that it's in. There we go. Again, we'll just test it. And that's working perfectly. Now you can see the days are in English, and also I believe it's Arabic. Correct me if I'm wrong, which I might be, but as far as I'm aware it's Arabic. Now that little disc, the circlip disc, just clips on, and you want to make sure that the tapered side is on the bottom, so that when you go to take it off next time, you can just put your screwdriver underneath and pop it up. Whereas if you put the flat side to the bottom, you can't fit a screwdriver underneath it. Well, you can still get it off, it's just a bit trickier. And again, the dial just has those friction feet, so you just push that into the movement and it stays down. It's still operating correctly. So I'm just setting it there so that it had just ticked over, which means the watch is at midnight. So now I know where to put the hour hand. And I've just got my hand press tool here, being very careful. Sorry you can't quite see, but basically I'm just pushing down the center of that hand. And then you want to move this around until it gets to midnight again. And you know, once it clicks over, you can put your minute hand back on at the 12 o'clock position. Now it doesn't have to be perfect because it does kind of click over slowly over about an hour or so. But just get it as close as you can. Now the minute hand can go on. Again, using the same tool, but just the other side. And then the second hand can go on wherever. And you just need to make sure that once everything's pushed down, that nothing's going to interfere. So they're level, so their hands don't hit the dial, or them hitting each other. Now I couldn't find my case opening tool, so I just used my Leatherman here, very professional. But I'm just popping off that bezel so that we can give everything a good look over and a good clean. Now being a work watch, I have changed this crystal many times. You know, you get welding slag or grinding sparks on it or something and it just wrecks the glass. So I've swapped it quite a few times and it's not that bad, so I'm going to leave that on. But I will run everything through the ultrasonic cleaner. So this works really well for parts like this. Gets rid of all the red dirt and the grime and everything off. And after about 15 minutes or however long I set it for, I'll pull them out, dry them off. Now I'm doing this with tweezers because everything's pretty hot in there. As you can see, it's just over 60 degrees. But couldn't quite get that piece with the tweezers. Now that everything's nice and clean, I can case the movement. Oh man, I'm looking forward to seeing this all back together. It's been a long time since I've been able to wear this. Put the stem back in. Now on these dive watches, the stem pushes down and screws in. So that's just to add to the waterproofing. There's also O-rings in the crown on the stem. Just lubricating that ball bearing on the rotor. Again, this bearing's quite big. These watches seem to be built like tanks. I mean, I've really put this thing through its paces. And other than not holding time quite well and needing a service, it's held up really well. There is a certain way you have to put these rotors on. So on the Paul intermediate wheel there's a dot. And that has to line up with that small hole on the right hand side of the rotor there. So if you line those up and then you screw the rotor down or tighten the rotor down, then you know that it's lined up properly. I don't quite know why this is. I'm assuming it's so that it's in sync, so that it winds it correctly. I'm not sure what would happen if you didn't get it right, but it says to do it, so we will do it. Here I've just got a silicone grease applicator, So this is for the case back O-ring. Now the thread's a little iffy on this. I'm not quite sure why, but I can never seem to get it started that well. But alas, we have it on. Tighten it up with my trusty ball again. Make sure it's nice and tight, because no doubt it will get a bit more abuse in the future. I want to make sure that thing is not leaking. So this little ring here, this stops the bezel from being able to rotate clockwise. So bezels on dive watches should only rotate anti-clockwise. And this is a safety feature so that when divers have set the bezel in the position of when they started their dive, they won't accidentally turn it in the direction that will tell them that they've been underwater for less time than they have. The bezel also has an O-ring inside of it, so just put that in the silicone grease applicator and get that in. I'm just presuming it has an O-ring to provide a little bit of friction to the bezel, because you don't really need it to be waterproof. And it just clicks on by hand. I did put this movement on my phone time graph app, and it said it had an amplitude of, I think it was 250 and minus 5 seconds a day. So I'm over the moon with that. And just like that, it's all done. Just have to put the band back on. I'm going to keep the rubber band, but I might put a NATO strap on later. But other than that, it's all finished. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the video, and see you next time.